Captain Lee Mina's eyes opened slowly as the cryogenic pod hissed and released its icy grip on her body. The cold metal against her skin felt like needles, but she had trained for this moment for years. Her neural implants came online with a soft buzz, flooding her mind with information she needed to process quickly. Earth was gone. Not just defeated, but completely conquered by an alien race called the HFY Dominion. The last transmission from home still echoed in her memory. Cities burning, defense fleets scattered like leaves in a storm, and billions of humans either dead or enslaved. The HFY had swept through human space with their living ships, biological vessels that could heal damage and adapt to any weapon humanity threw at them. It had taken them only 6 months to crush a civilization that had spread across dozens of star systems. Mina pulled herself upright in the pod, her muscles aching from months of frozen sleep. Around her, thousands of other pods lined the massive cargo bay of the dreadnought Lazarus. Each one contained a volunteer who had agreed to this suicide mission. They were humanity's last hope, though hope might be too strong a word for what they were attempting. The ship itself was humanity's greatest achievement and its final gamble. Engineers had worked around the clock to install an experimental quantum fold drive that could theoretically punch through dimensions and reach places that normal, faster-than-light travel could never access. The HFY homeworld of Nethkala was one such place, protected by gravitational storms and space-time distortions that made it unreachable by conventional means. Commander Park Jiho was already at his station when Mina made her way to the bridge. His face looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes that suggested he had been awake for hours reviewing their situation. The navigation console in front of him displayed readings that should have been impossible. They had actually made it. The quantum fold drive had worked, tearing through the fabric of reality itself to bring them to the enemy's doorstep. "Captain, you need to see this," Jiho said without looking up from his screens. His voice carried a tone that Mina had learned to recognize during their training. It was the sound of a man trying to stay calm while everything around him defied explanation. Lieutenant Kim Sora was busy at the systems monitoring station, her fingers dancing across holographic displays as she checked the ship's condition after their impossible journey. The Lazarus had taken damage during the dimensional transit, but nothing they couldn't handle. What worried her more were the readings coming from outside the ship. "All 10,000 crew members are beginning revival procedures," Sora reported. "But Captain, the external sensors are picking up something strange. The HFY fleet positions don't match our intelligence reports." Mina moved to the main viewing screen and activated the external cameras. What she saw made her blood run cold, though not for the reasons she had expected. The space around Nethkala should have been swarming with HFY bioships, their organic hulls pulsing with alien life as they patrolled their most important world. Instead, she saw something that looked like a graveyard. Massive alien vessels drifted through space without power or movement. Their once living hulls had turned into something that looked like crystal or glass, transparent and brittle. Some of the ships were breaking apart, their crystallized sections floating away like frozen tears. The sight was both beautiful and terrifying. "How many ships are out there?" Mina asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "Preliminary scans show over 300 vessels of various sizes," Jiho replied. "None of them are showing any signs of life or energy output. It's like they just stopped." The crew members who had been awakened first began arriving on the bridge, each one stopping short when they saw the display screens. These were humanity's finest soldiers, scientists and engineers, all volunteers who had known they were probably going to die on this mission. But none of them had prepared for this scenario. "Could this be some kind of trap?" asked Dr. Yoon Hana, the ship's chief xenobiologist. She had studied HFY technology for years, trying to understand how their bioships worked. "Maybe they're just pretending to be dead?" Mina considered the possibility, but something about the scene felt genuinely wrong. The HFY were arrogant conquerors who had never shown fear or hesitation. They wouldn't stage such an elaborate deception when they could simply destroy the human ship with overwhelming force. "Run deep scans on those vessels," she ordered. "I want to know what happened here. And someone get me a full tactical assessment of the system. If the HFY fleet is dead, what killed them?" As the crew worked to answer her questions, Mina stared at the crystallized ships and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cryogenic sleep. They had come here to destroy the Kethvar and avenge humanity's defeat, but it looked like something else had beaten them to it. Major Choi Daeho suited up in his combat armor, checking his weapon systems one final time before leading the first reconnaissance mission into the dead zone around Nethkala. His team of 12 specialists had trained for months to board hostile Kethvar vessels, expecting fierce resistance from alien defenders. Instead, they found themselves floating through a cosmic cemetery where massive bioships drifted like frozen monuments to some unknown catastrophe. The shuttle carrying Daeho's team approached the nearest Kethvar vessel, a kilometer-long cruiser that had once pulsed with organic life. Now it looked like someone had turned it into a work of art made from clear crystal. The ship's hull, which intelligence reports described as flexible and self-healing, had become rigid and transparent. Through the crystallized walls, they could see the internal structures frozen in place like insects trapped in amber. "This is incredible," whispered Corporal Shin Hyok as their shuttle docked with the alien vessel. "It's like the entire ship just turned to glass in an instant." Daeho led his team through the airlock, their boots crunching on crystallized debris that scattered across the floor like broken diamonds. The corridors that should have been filled with alien defenders were empty, except for the occasional crystallized fragment that might once have been part of the ship's living systems. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows through the transparent walls, creating a maze of refracted light that made navigation difficult. Back on the Lazarus, Dr. Yoon Hana worked frantically at her laboratory station, analyzing samples that the reconnaissance teams were transmitting back to the ship. Her years of studying Kethvar biotechnology had prepared her for many things, but not for this. The crystallized material wasn't just dead tissue, it was something else entirely, as if the very atoms had been rearranged into a new form of matter. "Captain Mina, you need to hear this," Dr. Yoon called out over the comm system. She had been monitoring Kethvar communication frequencies, hoping to intercept tactical information about their defenses. Instead, she had found something much more disturbing. The signals were weak and fragmented, clearly automated distress calls that had been broadcasting for months. As Dr. Yoon worked to translate them, a picture began to emerge that turned everything they thought they knew about the war upside down. The Kethvar hadn't conquered humanity out of greed or expansion. They had been running from something, desperately searching for a solution to a problem that threatened their entire species. The messages keep mentioning something called the quantum decay, Dr. Yoon explained to the assembled bridge crew. "From what I can understand, it's some kind of disease that attacks the fundamental structure of their biotechnology. But it's not just killing their ships, it's changing them at the molecular level." Lieutenant Kim Sora pulled up the translation, data on her screen, her face growing pale as she read through the intercepted messages. According to this, they were harvesting human neural patterns, not for torture or experimentation, but to try and find a cure. They thought our brain chemistry might hold the key to stopping whatever is killing them. The revelation hit the bridge crew like a physical blow. They had come here expecting to face the monsters who had destroyed their world, only to discover that those monsters might have been victims themselves. The Kethvar had committed genocide against humanity, but they had done it out of desperation, not malice. Sergeant Lim Taeman was leading the second wave of boarding parties deeper into the crystallized ships when his team made an even more disturbing discovery. In what appeared to be the ship's central processing area, they found evidence that the crystallization process wasn't random. It was spreading in patterns that suggested intelligence, almost like the quantum decay was actively rewriting the fundamental laws of physics in localized areas. "Major Daeho, you need to see this," Taeman reported over the comm. His team had found what looked like a Kethvar computer core, but instead of organic neural networks, it had become a complex crystal matrix that still showed signs of electrical activity. As they studied the crystallized core, Taeman's sensors began picking up readings that made no sense according to human physics. The crystal wasn't just storing information, it was processing it in ways that seemed to bend the normal rules of matter and energy. Worse yet, his equipment was detecting similar quantum signatures spreading throughout the ship, as if the decay was still active and continuing to transform everything it touched. Dr. Yoon's analysis of the new data sent chills through the entire crew of the Lazarus. The quantum decay wasn't just a disease that killed HFY technology. It was something far more dangerous, a phenomenon that attacked the basic structure of reality itself, turning stable matter into something that existed according to different physical laws. If this continues to spread, Dr. Yoon reported grimly, it won't stop with the HFY. This quantum decay could eventually consume all organic matter in the galaxy. Every planet, every species, everything that lives and breathes could end up like those ships out there. The implications were staggering. Humanity had been on the verge of extinction, but now they faced the possibility that everything in the universe might be doomed to the same crystalline fate. The HFY had tried to use human neural patterns to find a cure, but they had failed. Now the last humans in existence were floating in a system where reality itself was breaking down, surrounded by the crystallized remains of their former enemies. Major Daeho's team continued their exploration of the dead ships, each discovery adding to the growing horror of their situation. They had come to destroy the HFY, but instead they had found something that made their original mission seem insignificant compared to the threat facing all life in the galaxy. The war room aboard the Lazarus had never felt smaller than it did now, with 20 of humanity's finest minds gathered around a holographic display that showed the unthinkable truth. Captain Lee Mina stood at the head of the table, her hands pressed against the cool metal surface as she tried to process what engineer Bae Yoonji had just revealed. The quantum plague that was turning the HFY fleet into crystal wasn't some natural disaster or weapon from an unknown enemy. It was their own creation, gone horribly wrong. Bae Yoonji had spent the last 18 hours analyzing data from the crystallized ships, her engineering background helping her piece together fragments of HFY technology records. What she found was a story of ambition that had spiraled into cosmic horror. Thousands of years ago, the HFY had reached the peak of biological evolution. Their bodies were perfect, their ships were living organisms that could heal and adapt, and their society had achieved everything they thought possible within the physical universe. They weren't satisfied with being the most advanced species in the galaxy, Bae explained, her voice heavy with exhaustion. They wanted to become something more than physical beings. The records show they tried to upload their consciousness directly into quantum space to exist as pure energy and thought without the limitations of matter. The experiment had worked, at least initially. The HFY scientists had successfully transferred consciousness into quantum fields, achieving a form of digital immortality that let them exist beyond physical death. But they had made a critical error in their calculations. The process created a feedback loop that began eating away at the quantum foundations that held reality together. What started as transcendence became a spreading cancer that turned everything it touched into crystallized matter that existed according to alien physics. Dr. Han Woo-sung, the ship's quantum physicist, had been working alongside Bae to understand the technical details of the disaster. His findings were even more disturbing than the origin story. The quantum cascade wasn't slowing down or burning itself out. Instead, it was gaining strength as it consumed more matter, creating an exponentially growing wave of destruction that would eventually reach beyond the HFY system. At current rates of expansion, the cascade will reach the nearest star system in approximately 50 years, Dr. Han reported to the assembled officers and scientists. From there, it will spread through the entire galaxy within a few centuries. Nothing organic will survive contact with it. Commander Park Ji-ho leaned forward in his chair, his face reflecting the same shock and disbelief that everyone in the room was feeling. So when the HFY conquered humanity, they weren't just being aggressive conquerors. They were trying to find a way to stop this thing before it killed everything in the universe. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place in ways that made Captain Mina feel sick to her stomach. The HFY had discovered that human neural patterns possessed a unique quality that could temporarily stabilize quantum fields. Human consciousness, when properly harvested and processed, could act as an anchor point that slowed the cascade's advance. The invasion of human space hadn't been about resources or territory. It had been a desperate attempt to gather enough human minds to create a permanent barrier against universal extinction. They turned billions of our people into living batteries, whispered Lieutenant Kim Sora, her voice barely audible in the silent war room. But they did it to save the galaxy. Dr. Han activated a new display that showed two possible courses of action, both of them terrible in their own way. The first option was to complete their original mission and destroy the HFY homeworld using the Lazarus's antimatter warheads. This would eliminate the aliens who had enslaved humanity and provide a measure of revenge for Earth's destruction. However, it would also eliminate the quantum stabilization systems that were currently holding the cascade in check, releasing it to consume everything in its path. The second option was almost worse to contemplate. The surviving HFY leadership had sent communication attempts to the Lazarus, desperate to negotiate with the humans they had worked so hard to capture. They were offering a partnership arrangement where humanity would help them develop a permanent solution to the quantum cascade. In exchange, they promised to treat humans as equals rather than slaves, sharing technology and resources to rebuild both civilizations. But we would still be trapped, Major Choi Daeho pointed out during the debate that followed. Even if they keep their promises about treating us as partners, we would be forever bound to them. Every human survivor would spend their lives working to solve a problem that the HFY created in the first place. Sergeant Lim Taeman spoke up from his position near the back of the room. What about the people they already harvested? The billions of human minds they're using as quantum anchors right now? Do we just abandon them to save ourselves? The question hung in the air like a physical presence. The reconnaissance teams had discovered evidence that many of the harvested human consciousness patterns were still active within HFY quantum systems. They weren't exactly alive in any traditional sense, but they weren't completely dead either. Any solution that destroyed the HFY infrastructure would also eliminate whatever remained of those billions of human minds. Captain Mina looked around the room at faces that reflected her own internal struggle. These were people who had volunteered for a suicide mission to avenge humanity's destruction. They had expected to die as heroes, striking a blow against the aliens who had conquered their world. Instead, they found themselves holding the fate of all life in the galaxy in their hands, forced to choose between revenge and survival, between freedom and responsibility. "We have 6 hours before the HFY expect our answer," she announced. "Use that time to think about what we're really choosing here. Are we choosing for humanity, or are we choosing for everyone and everything that will ever exist? Because once we make this decision, there's no going back." The shuttle carrying Captain Lee Mina and her strike team cut through the atmosphere of Nethkala like a knife through silk, but what they saw below made everyone fall silent. The HFY homeworld had once been described in intelligence reports as a paradise of living cities where buildings grew like trees and technology merged seamlessly with nature. Now it looked like a planet made of broken glass. Corporal Nam Yejin pressed her face against the shuttle's viewport, unable to believe what she was seeing. Entire mountain ranges had been transformed into crystalline structures that caught and reflected the light of Nethkala's twin suns. What had once been forests of towering biostructures now stood frozen in time, their organic curves preserved in transparent crystal that stretched as far as the eye could see. "It's beautiful," whispered Private Oh Sung-ho, then immediately felt guilty for saying it. This crystalline wonderland represented the death of an entire civilization. Yet there was something hauntingly magnificent about the way the light danced through the transformed landscape. Captain Mina studied the tactical display, looking for a safe landing zone near the quantum signatures that Dr. Han Wusung had detected from orbit. The planet's core was showing energy readings that defied explanation, massive power sources that seemed to pulse in rhythm with something that registered like a heartbeat on their sensors. That was where they needed to go, down into the deepest levels of the planet where the HFY had built their most important facilities. The strike team consisted of 12 volunteers, each carrying enough antimatter charges to level a city. Their original mission had been simple: plant the explosives at key points around the HFY command centers and detonate them simultaneously, ensuring that humanity's enemies could never threaten anyone again. But as they descended through the crystallized ruins of what had once been a thriving metropolis, that mission felt increasingly hollow. The buildings around them told a story of gradual transformation, rather than sudden destruction. Some structures were only partially crystallized, their organic walls showing the exact moment when the quantum cascade had reached them. In other areas, the crystal formations had grown in complex patterns that suggested the transformation process had taken months or even years to complete. This hadn't been a quick death. It had been a slow, inevitable conversion of everything living into something else entirely. As they moved deeper underground, following maintenance tunnels that led toward the planet's core, the team began encountering active HFY technology. The corridors here were still made of living material, pulsing walls that responded to their presence with bioluminescent patterns. But even here, they could see crystal formations beginning to spread along the edges, advancing slowly but steadily toward the planet's heart. "Captain, I'm reading massive energy signatures ahead," reported Corporal Nam Yejin, checking her scanner as they approached what appeared to be a sealed chamber. "Whatever's in there, it's drawing more power than our entire ship uses in a month." The chamber beyond the sealed door was unlike anything any human had ever seen. It stretched upward for hundreds of meters, its walls covered in a network of organic conduits that pulsed with energy. But at the center of the room, suspended in a column of light that extended from floor to ceiling, was something that made Captain Mina's blood run cold. It was a quantum singularity, a tear in space-time itself, and within its swirling energy patterns she could see faces, human faces, billions of them, trapped within the alien construct. The stolen consciousness of humanity's dead flickered and moved within the singularity like ghosts made of light. Men, women, and children from every human world that had fallen to the HFY were somehow preserved here, their minds harvested and converted into quantum anchors that held back the cascade. They appeared to be aware, their eyes following the strike team's movements with expressions of recognition and desperate hope. From the shadows at the far end of the chamber came a voice that spoke in perfect human language, though the words carried harmonics that no human throat could produce. "You are the ones who came to destroy us," it said, and a figure emerged from the organic walls of the chamber. The last HFY overmind was nothing like the warriors who had conquered human space. It was ancient and fragile, its biosuit barely keeping its deteriorating form functional. "I am Teknara, the last of my kind to retain individual consciousness," the creature continued, moving slowly toward the human strike team. "The others have either been consumed by the cascade or merged into collective entities to better resist its effects. I have waited here, hoping that survivors from your species would eventually come." Captain Mina kept her weapon trained on the alien, but found herself listening as it began to explain the true scope of the crisis they all faced. The quantum cascade wasn't limited to their galaxy. It was spreading through dimensional barriers, consuming reality itself across multiple universes. The HFY had detected signs of the same crystallization process beginning in at least 12 other galaxies, all connected through quantum entanglement to their failed experiment. "Your species possesses something we lack," Teknara explained, gesturing toward the singularity containing billions of human minds. "Adaptability at the quantum level. Your consciousness naturally resists the cascade's effects, not through technology but through the fundamental nature of how human minds process reality. We need that adaptability, but we also need your creativity to find solutions we cannot imagine." The alien's proposal was both generous and terrible. Instead of keeping humanity enslaved, the surviving HFY wanted to merge their technologies and knowledge with human adaptability to create a permanent solution to the cascade. Humans would become partners rather than slaves, working together to heal the damage and prevent the destruction of multiple universes. But it would still mean binding humanity's future to the aliens who had destroyed their world. Private Oh Seung-ho was the first to break the tense silence that followed the alien's explanation. "Half our people are already dead because of you," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "Why should we trust anything you say now?" "Because the alternative is universal extinction," Teknara replied simply. "And because those minds you see in the singularity are not truly dead. They can be restored to individual existence once we solve the cascade problem, but only if we work together." The strike team found themselves split down the middle, just as the crew back on the Lazarus had been. Some wanted to complete their original mission, plant the antimatter charges, and die as free humans, taking their revenge against the Kethvar even if it meant dooming the universe. Others argued that survival, and the possibility of eventually freeing the trapped human minds, was worth temporary cooperation with their former enemies. As they debated, warning lights began flashing throughout the chamber. Teknara's expression showed alarm as automated defense systems that had been dormant for centuries began awakening in response to the human presence. The Kethvar infrastructure was finally recognizing them as threats, and they had only minutes before the planet's defenses would make their choice for them. Captain Mina looked at the singularity containing billions of human souls, then at her, team members who were looking to her for leadership in an impossible situation. The weight of choice pressed down on her shoulders as she realized that whatever decision she made in the next few minutes would determine the fate of everything that had ever existed or ever would exist. Captain Lee Mina stepped forward toward the quantum singularity, her heart pounding as she made the decision that would change everything. The antimatter charges remained on her belt, unused as she reached out to touch the column of light that contained the consciousness of billions of her fellow humans. The moment her hand made contact with the energy field, her mind exploded, with connections she had never imagined possible. The experience was overwhelming at first, like trying to listen to 1,000 conversations at once while swimming through an ocean of memories that weren't her own. But gradually patterns began to emerge from the chaos. The human minds trapped within the quantum matrix hadn't simply been stored like files on a computer. They had been growing, learning, and adapting to their new existence in ways that defied everything anyone knew about consciousness. A familiar voice reached out to her through the quantum noise, and Mina found herself face to face with her own brother, Captain Lee Dong-hyun, who had died defending the Mars colonies months ago. But this wasn't just a memory or a ghost. It was actually him, somehow preserved and enhanced by his time within the alien construct. "Mina, we've been waiting for you," Dong-hyun said, his form flickering between human appearance and patterns of pure energy. "We've learned things here that could change everything." The Kethvar were right about human adaptability, but they didn't understand how far it could go. Through her connection to the Matrix, Mina began to see what her brother meant. The human minds trapped within the quantum space had discovered that consciousness itself was far more flexible than anyone had ever realized. They had learned to exist as pure thought, to manipulate quantum fields through will alone, and to perceive reality in ways that transcended physical limitations. Most importantly, they had figured out how to reverse the crystallization process. Lieutenant Jang Minho, who had been monitoring the situation from the Lazarus, felt his own neural implants suddenly activate as Mina's discovery reached the ship. The quantum field was expanding, creating a network that connected every human consciousness within range. For the first time since the war began, scattered groups of human survivors found themselves able to communicate instantly across vast distances. Back in the chamber on Nethkala, Teknara watched in amazement as Captain Mina began to glow with the same energy patterns as the quantum singularity. "Impossible," the alien whispered. "Your species is interfacing with quantum space without technological assistance. We never imagined organic minds could adapt so completely." The process that followed took place over several days, though time seemed to flow differently within the quantum space. Human creativity and intuition guided the healing process, while Kethvar knowledge provided the technical framework needed to make the impossible happen. Working together, they began to reverse the cascade that had been consuming reality for centuries. The first sign of success came when the crystallized forests outside began to show patches of green. Plants that had been frozen in glass for generations suddenly burst back into life, their organic structure restored as the quantum fields around them stabilized. The sight brought tears to the eyes of hardened soldiers who had never expected to see new life growing anywhere again. Corporal Nam Yejin was among the first to witness the transformation spreading across the planet's surface. Trees that had been crystal sculptures began to pulse with renewed life, their branches reaching toward the sky as if awakening from a long sleep. The air itself seemed to shimmer as reality reasserted its natural laws, pushing back the alien physics that had dominated the world for so long. The success on Nethkala created a ripple effect that spread throughout the galaxy at faster than light speeds carried by quantum entanglement through the same channels that had originally spread the cascade. On distant worlds, crystallized ruins began to show signs of recovery as the healing wave reached them. Species that had been extinct for centuries found their consciousness patterns restored from quantum storage, returned to life in ways that seemed like miracles. Private Oh Seung-ho found himself able to communicate directly with Kethavar technicians who had once been his enemies, their minds linked through the quantum network that now connected both species. Together, they worked to design new types of ships that combined human creativity with alien biotechnology, vessels that could exist simultaneously in normal space and quantum dimensions. Months passed as the restoration work continued, guided by the hybrid consciousness that Captain Mina had become. She existed now in both organic and quantum states, able to think with her human brain, while simultaneously processing information at the speed of light through quantum networks. It was a strange existence, but one that allowed her to coordinate the massive project of rebuilding two civilizations from the ashes of war. The first hybrid ships to leave Nethkala carried mixed crews of humans and Kethavar, their destination, the ruins of Earth and the other destroyed human worlds. But these weren't conquest fleets or rescue missions in any traditional sense. They were something entirely new. Combinations of both species working together to create something greater than either could achieve alone. Lieutenant Jang Minho stood on the bridge of the Lazarus, which had been transformed from a weapon of war into a mobile research station. Through the viewports, he could see the hybrid ships departing for their various destinations, each one carrying the seeds of a new type of civilization. The frozen soldiers who had awakened from cryogenic sleep months ago had completed their mission, though none of them could have imagined what success would look like. Captain Mina, existing now as both matter and energy, watched from multiple perspectives as the restoration work began on Earth. The planet that had been turned into a graveyard was showing its first signs of recovery, with quantum-enhanced vegetation beginning to grow in the ruins of major cities. Human survivors who had been hidden in underground shelters emerged to find a world that was strange but hopeful, where former enemies worked side by side to heal the damage of war. The mission to destroy the Kethavar had become something far more important, the salvation of all existence. Humanity had been defeated, enslaved, and nearly destroyed, but in the end, they had become the key to saving not just their own galaxy, but countless others that were threatened by the quantum cascade. Victory and defeat had become meaningless concepts in the face of universal survival and the birth of something entirely new. The frozen soldiers had awakened to find their world destroyed, but they would sleep again someday, knowing that their sacrifice had made possible the restoration of everything that ever was or could be.